Oh, it's delightful to be together. It's good to get the hugs. I think it's amazing how much humanity craves touch right now, and
Yeah.
human touch and the human face without a Zoom camera between you is a blessed moment. So glad to
Yeah.
be with you.
Since your interview on the High Wire is one of the most watched interviews we've ever done. We had a lot of speculation as to, COVID-19. It was fairly new at the moment. Was it man-made? All of these questions that we sort of went through. And I know we could spend hours just talking about this pandemic, but let me just simplify it to benefit of hindsight now. We're nearly a year since we last spoke. Did anything in this pandemic or with this virus or with this experience um, change from what you thought when you were looking at it? Maybe I see this differently now.
No, in some ways, I'm just amazed at the steady ply of nature. Nature has unfolded just as she should have in this last year. And what I mean by that is the way in which viruses spread around the planet, which we've seen for the really the origin of life on the planet. For billions of years, we've seen genetic information spread. And so to watch an early narrative about the attack of a virus and this theoretical spread from one plane to the next and this person landed there, to the maps that unfolded over the last year of the United States and then globally, to demonstrate something much more profound than the story of a virus, which is the story of health and the loss of it. And what has unfolded is really a demonstration of the fact that the human species is reaching a tipping point of viable life on Earth. When you watch the mortality data rolling out from this pandemic as it has been narrated, you see that it's not exploiting the typical populations that we see respiratory viruses typically attacking, which is historically children. We see these hot pockets of mortality from SARS in 2002, MERS 2012, COVID-19, if you want to call it that, or SARS-CoV-2 in 2019, 2020. These 2-year epidemics that hit were not new processes, not new viruses per se. It was just a different landscape of human biology that it hit. And never have we seen it more vulnerable and more damaged landscape than we have in the last 2 years. And what we're seeing is very, very low illness rates in children, but we see extremely high rates of illness and hospitalization and ultimately mortality in elderly people on pharmaceuticals. And so the interplay between decaying biology and pharmaceutical intervention on that biology is what played out. So we saw a pandemic of vulnerability rather than a pandemic of a virus, is how I see it. If you look at the public health statistics, we demonstrated a new vulnerability of human biology on the planet, and it seemed to be the interplay between this rise of chronic disease, the collapse of the innate immune system, which is stemming from the collapse of microbiology within our gut, within our kind of microbiome of the ecosystems of our organs. So as we lose that organic garden of life within us, we become vulnerable in this innate immune system, and then you pile chronic inflammation and then pharmaceuticals on top of that, and we created the perfect storm. And so the pandemic that unfolded was a demonstration to humanity of what we've created. And when I say that, we may or may not have played a hand in creating the virus, we 100% created the vulnerability. And so that's what I think we've seen a pandemic of, is an inherent vulnerability of human behavior and human technology that conspired to create a high mortality event around the planet. Whether or not that mortality was in excess to what it should have been or any of that, that's still, I think, is going to take us a year or two to really ice the public health statistics. But regardless of whether we had excess death or not, we certainly saw mortality in pockets of these vulnerable populations that we created.
Are you concerned that potentially one of the great players in these health issues, you talk about those elderly that are on pharmaceuticals, yet what has been sold to us is that pharmaceuticals are the way through this? What are your thoughts on that? Do you think people are buying it?
I mean, I think obviously a lot of us are buying it, and I think in some ways what we're witnessing is a schism in human philosophy here. Is that at some point we bought into the story that nature was against us, and that's a super dangerous story in the event that you actually come from nature.
Right.
If you actually come from nature and you're actually part of nature, and in fact your biology as a mammal would have never developed out of that nature but for the intelligence of viruses and but for that genetic adaptation that the viruses allow for, we would never have emerged. And so if that's the scientific reality, which seems to be, then the belief that we are apart from nature and that nature is attacking us and that we need to fight back against that nature, that's the paradigm in which we create the existential risk of not a pandemic, but of an extinction event. And so we are stepping ever nearer to this extinction cliff by this schism of belief that we are somehow separate from nature. And I can't remember if we hit it on our last interview or not, but if you look up the definition of nature, it actually defines it in Oxford's dictionary as the minerals, the plants, and all of the other animals other than humans.
Other than humans.
We literally wrote ourselves out of the definition of nature. And when you do that, something interesting happens to the big philosophy of life, which is the new emergence of scarcity. If you really understood that you and I came from the soils of the earth and the incredible biophotonic energy that occurs when the sunshine hits the surface of a leaf, that is fueled by a diverse and massive microecosystem below it, that is pulling the nutrients of Mother Earth into it, and then recycling that through to a food system that then hits our microbiome of the gut and then is fed to the mitochondria, the microbiome within our cells, to release biophotonic energy. So that we are literally solar events. We are literally the reverse of photosynthesis. Our life is a photo release of solar energy. That's what vitality is. And so we are all these small star-like creatures that release star energy as it's translated from the solar systems to the sun, to the surface of the planet, through the soils, to the plants, to the food, to the animals, to the humans, and we release that light. And so as light beings, biophotonic recyclers, we have incredible capacity to adapt, change, transform, mutate. Whether we be a virus or a human, we should always be a mutation event. We should always be looking for gain of function. When we decide that the very mechanisms by which the biophotonic energy would get to us, i.e. food, or the viruses that would allow for the adaptation and transmutation to happen within our systems, when we see that as the enemy, or we see that as somehow needing technologic innovation, we really endanger our relationship to the whole matrix, and we alienate ourselves from the source of life.
I'm going to push my audience a little bit here. At least I think I am. Is the Earth heating? Do we have global warming? Does that exist?
Oh, certainly. The globe has warmed over and over again. So the Earth warms. Over the last 800,000 years, we've seen about 6 big spikes in Earth temperature. So temperature goes up and CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere correlate with those events. And so those events occur very frequently on the geologic scale of 4 billion years of life on Earth. Lots of warming periods, lots of cooling periods. We're definitely in a spiking warming period right now. The alarming thing about our current situation is that we are now going logarithms above the rate of acceleration of the accumulation of toxins in the environment, and that warming effect of the oceans is accelerating at a rate not seen before. And so it's those two measures that I think are indisputable, that planet is definitely increasing in temperature. The oceans are definitely rising. Working with an incredible team, Sail Drone is the company. They are brilliant in their design of this craft. It's a 22-foot sailboat, basically, that has a rigid wing instead of a sail, and it's unmanned drone. It's powered by solar and is able to circumnavigate the globe with no inputs, which is allowing science to be done at an extraordinary speed in places where we couldn't usually do science. And their work up in the Bering Sea, up north of Alaska there and all of that, has shown unbelievable rate of warming, of 4 degrees Celsius change in the oceans in the Bering Sea just over the last decade or two. Startling speed of this warming, which has melted the ice to the point where Russia is now moving across our northern hemisphere, north of Canada, up in that Arctic Circle, all of their oil and gas. They never did that before because the Bering Sea was full of ice that they couldn't sail through. That ice is no longer there, and we changed the ability of Russia to move its oil and gas to Europe via the ocean, where ice was just moments ago. And so is it warming? Absolutely it's warming. Is that a human-made event?
Right.
That's the question, I think.
Yeah.
Is it human-made or not? Was the virus human-made or not? You know, these are the arguments that we get in,
Right.
and then we screw ourselves
Well,
up.
especially since we're apart from nature, you know, did we do that or did we not? Because,
Did we engineer something?
Right.
That's,
Is it
that's
nature's fault or
separating?
is it our fault? Couldn't be any sort of balance in between.
That's right. And I would say as of the 1950s, the jury was out, because by 1950 we had hit the same point that we've hit 4 or 5 other times in 800,000 years as far as the warming of the planet and everything else. But the 1950s jury should have definitely been out. Like, this looks like a natural event. It's about the right timing for another warming event. There was some interesting data that came out a while back that the surface of Mars was increasing temperature at the same rate as Earth. All right. So the whole solar system is warming up. Must not have anything to do with humans. Now we're mucking with Mars. Maybe we start screwing things up there. I don't know.
Right.
But by the 1950s, it was clear we were in a rapid rise. We were reaching a similar pinnacle of temperature as we had hit multiple times before. It's what's happened between 1950 and now, the last 70 years, that gets us very concerned, because we shot way past anything that's been recorded, you know, as far as those surface temperatures. And importantly, we're showing the death of the lungs of the planet. And so what I mean by that is very vital, because we need to get in for a moment, maybe in a second, around the story of carbon. But we vilified carbon in the 1990s, just like we vilified the viruses in 2019, okay?
Yeah.
We suddenly came out with this story from Al Gore of global warming, and the inconvenient truth came out, and suddenly everything was terrified of carbon. And industries were starting to be regulated for their carbon outputs, and we were starting to realize that our transportation industry was putting way too much carbon in the atmosphere. All of these things, true, we're definitely toxifying the planet. You just need to stick your mouth over the end of an exhaust pipe on a car to decide whether or not it's good for you or not.
Right.
You know, it just doesn't work.
Yeah. No, I mean, it's exactly right. The point I've always made, and to my friends that are environmentalists a couple of years ago, I was like, drop the global warming thing, whether or not, you know, the earth, you know, the ocean is going to be a foot deeper 50 years from now. Nobody thinks like that. We're too immediate. I would do a commercial if you really, you know, don't want to see advancements in cars. You know, you just do a commercial where the car is running, you shut the garage door, you leave the baby in the baby seat and walk into the kitchen. Everybody's like, oh my God, why are you going, oh my God? If you know, if fossil fuel burning is not a problem on this planet, what are you worried about leaving your child in that garage? We know that it kills you. And so one of the things that, you know, a few years ago I would have said, let's just talk about, don't we all want clean air, clean water? You know, don't we want a cleaner environment right now? You know, despite this long-term warming thing, I actually think I'm wrong in some ways. Somehow, you know, whether it was Greta Thunberg or somehow, just over the last couple of years, global warming, it took hold. Something that I thought Al Gore kind of tried to get going, didn't seem to go anywhere. Now you've got the youth of the world are terrified they're all going to die. Governments all talking about global warming as the thing, and that's what makes me suspicious. Now it's a slogan and has very little to do with the health of humanity, the health of this planet. But boy, is it a thing now. And so you were just about to go there. Is man involved? You know, so this last 70 years, what do we learn now from this?
What we're seeing in the last 70 years is that the highest acceleration of CO2 output from industrial everything, technologies, including your energy sector, your transportation sector, your agriculture, your concrete industry, your explosion of cattle and poultry and pork production after World War II. All of that has happened in the last 70 years at exponential rates, terrifying speed of innovation to allow those industries to scale to places we never imagined them being. We never imagined a time in the 1970s when we would be butchering 60 billion animals a year, which is currently what our protein industry does.
Wow.
60 billion animals a year are butchered for human consumption. That's just a scale we weren't really dreaming up in the 1960s and 70s, you know, that post-World War II era. We were more worried about democracy versus, you know, communism, you know, and so we didn't see this coming.
Yeah.
We were too focused on our division points to understand the road that humanity was on. But the interesting phenomenon that has revealed itself is that the CO2 in the atmosphere during that that real massive push from 1950 to 1975 did not accumulate. CO2 levels in the atmosphere went from like 300 to 310, 315 over that 25-year period, which was the steepest spike of CO2 output that we'd seen on the planet probably ever. And so we see this huge spike of emissions, but it doesn't accumulate in the atmosphere. If it does, it's a very small incremental change. Starting in the mid-1970s, we start to see a marriage of the emissions with the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere. And so lots of CO2 emissions and no increase in CO2 out there means somebody's breathing that in.
Right.
That CO2 may have been emitting at a higher rate than ever before, but the planet had no problem breathing in. In the 1970s, we suddenly see accumulation rates of CO2 in the atmosphere matching the CO2 output of our industries, which means the lungs stopped working.
Got it.
The lungs of the planet is the soil. Yes, trees, yes, that, but you don't get trees respirating if you don't have the microbiome and the mycelium in the soil doing its work. And so what happened in the 1970s is we started to poison the microbiome of the soil systems and create dirt on a scale that is now, again, back then, unbelievable. But the current estimates are that 97% of the arable farmland in the world has now been depleted or severely depleted, which means 97% of the lungs of the earth are now in its end stage of emphysema. There is no surface area left. Emphysema, or COPD as it's called now, but emphysema of the lung is where all of the tiny little bubbles that form all those tiny pockets of airway that are responsible for exchange of carbon dioxide and oxygen to the bloodstream start to get destroyed, and you end up with empty balloons instead of these intricate, massive, systems of lung tissue that are huge, cover, perhaps kilometers of surface area. It's just like massive amount of space when you put 50 people in the room breathing. You've got kilometers of surface area breathing. Emphysematous lungs have lost all of that architecture and are now just these empty balloons. They're bags, they have no weight. In anatomy lab, I will never forget gross anatomy. It taught me so many incredible lessons, but many of the bodies that we were dissecting had emphysema. And you would pick up a healthy lung and it's heavy, it's dense, it feels like what you imagine liver to feel like. It's dense tissue, and that's a lung? That's amazing, it feels so solid. And then you pick up the emphysema lung and it's a floppy balloon, weightless. The soils have become emphysematous. We have lost the architecture, the surface area of breath from the planet. And so what we have today is not so much global warming problem, we have a suffocation problem. The earth is suffocating, and we have made it the wrong story. We made it a political flashpoint of CO2, which we could measure and regulate easily. Yeah. But nobody knew how to measure the lungs. So they kept blaming the CO2 in the atmosphere, when in fact the problem was under our feet.
I feel bad for all the people that just stopped watching my show as you were discussing global warming and missed getting to this point, because it's amazing watching. I'm sure. I mean, we're watching the comments like, oh my God, this is it. Dell's sold out. He's out. You know what I mean? I'm out. And so they're going to miss this. But let me, to sort of bring this into a lay perspective, what you're saying, I guess, is that the farming techniques around the globe now all involve killing weeds, right? Killing everything around so that it's easier for farmers, so we can grow more, be more successful. And in that killing, we are killing all of the biome in that soil, all of the living, breathing organisms.
Respiratory organisms.
That are, taking in that CO2, or, these lungs. We've just wiped that out around the entire globe.
And there's a scarier, you're spot on. Okay. That's the right interpretation. And there's a almost scarier reality that follows up on the backside of that. So what I just described was the lungs dying. But there's something really insidious about the death of the lungs, because it turns out that carbon is not a poison. Carbon is literally the generative machine of life on Earth. Without carbon, biology as we know it on Earth does not exist. I don't care if you're a bacteria, an earthworm, or a human. You don't exist without carbon metabolism, which is the breaking apart of carbon molecules. The way that our bodies do this is by using the mitochondria, which are tiny little bacteria that live inside of our cells that are fed by the microorganisms of our gut. And so you got bacteria in your gut that are feeding the mitochondria fatty acid chains and carbohydrate chains. So you either got fatty acids or sugar, carbohydrates, that are flowing through the bloodstream being fed to the mitochondria. And in a single enzymatic step, the mitochondria takes both the sugar and the fat and turns it into the exact same molecule, which is acetyl-CoA. And that acetyl-CoA, again, that's right as it moves right through the membrane of the mitochondria, you now have the same thing. Now imagine for a moment, as a bit of an aside, how many millions of minutes have been wasted of humans arguing whether you should eat carbohydrates or fats.
Right.
That is an irrelevant issue. It is the wrong concept for nutrition, because they're the same molecule in one enzymatic step. Before they ever become energy for your body, they are the same molecule. We are so backwards in nutrition. And so the nutrition of today is arguing over fat, sugar, and protein, when in fact we should be talking about biophotonic energy of carbon. So we have vilified the CO2 in the atmosphere. We're now talking about pumping that CO2 out into tanks or burying it into the fracking wells that we've created to pull all the natural gas out of the thing that's now emitting CO2 and methane into the atmosphere. And we're now going to push the CO2 back down in there in the hopes that we clean up the atmosphere. If we sequester carbon out of the atmosphere, where's that future carbohydrate and fat going to come from? And so by killing the lungs of the planet, not only are CO2 collecting up there, we're losing the nutrient density, the true biophotonic energy of carbon within our plants, therefore within our animals, therefore within humanity. Why do we have pandemics? Because our energy level is dropping. Why is the energy level dropping of humanity? Because we've disrupted the biophotonic energetic exchange of sun, soil, plant, carbon transformation, carbon going from CO2 into long-chain fatty acids, into long-chain carbohydrates through the brilliance of the microbiome and plant life, and then breaking those long chains back into CO2 at our cellular level to release energy. CO2 is not the poison. CO2 is the accelerator on life on Earth. By demonizing viruses, by demonizing CO2, we are literally pulling the building blocks of life out from under us.
Well, add the one other, I think, demonic figure, the sun, light itself. It leads back to what I was saying. Now, as an ecologist or someone that believes in environment, I am being told that we need to use genetically modified crops. And what that always says to me, unless I'm missing something, means able to handle all the chemicals we're pouring onto the ground and survive that. So we're killing everything else around us. So genetically modified crops. And then, we got to block out the sun. I mean, this is a conversation I'm seeing all the time. Like, the sun is now our enemy. Wasn't even thinking about, CO2, I just accepted was an enemy. And so now I recognize I'm going to have to rethink that. I mean, sometimes I wonder, is the world being run by vampires? I mean, is it just the opposite of where we're supposed to be? And without, I think leaving us in a state of depression, I think what you've said to me rings true, right? I mean, sure, I think we can get less, toxic chemicals out of our air. I think cleaner burning cars, whether batteries, we're not going to have this argument, but batteries, yes, I see the pit mines and the probably like diamond mining, chopping kids' arms off, and is the battery the answer? I feel like at least we're attempting to try and find other ways of doing things, and somewhere out there might be a better road forward. But to me, the real question is the earth, right? I mean, we are being told chemicals are a way forward. Industrial chemical companies have taken over every part of our lives. We're now going to make synthetic meat. We're going to make protein, but we're going to do it through, chemical combinations, and it's like a world gone mad. Could you fix the farmland? I mean, is it too late? We hear that organic farming, I've heard it takes 5 years to sort of take a farm that is using all these chemicals to turn it around. I've made the mistake of being on a radio show that was like really interested in the vaccine topic, and I bring up pesticides or herbicides and realize this is a radio show in Kansas, and now all of a sudden it's like, oh bro, you weren't supposed to go there. I think about the farmers. They're worried because they've all left organic farming, at least the greater part of them, terrified of an idea of how do I farm without these things. We're being told that we'll never produce enough food if we don't use these chemicals. It's sort of a space you're in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Same existential truths apply here as they do to the biology we talked about earlier, whether it be around the internet or around CO2. Whenever we create these, divisive points, we know we're wrong. Like, that's where I've gotten to in my life. Like, if I hear somebody being really sure about themselves, all I know is they're wrong. I might not know what's right, but they've got to be wrong if they're sure about themselves. Because no human being in their isolated kingdom of their brain has the truth. Without the connectivity of humans, we lack perspective. We are too myopic. These poor little 6-pound brains in our head, they're not adequate. It's not enough gray matter in there to create genius. Genius comes through connectivity, and this is called quorum sensing in bacteria and fungi. When you get a large enough colony of bacteria and fungi in communication, they suddenly go into a moment of hyperintelligence, and they can create something much greater than any part or sum of the parts. They create hyperintelligence and therefore hyper ecosystems, hyper societies. We're capable of that with connection. If your language is divisive, if your belief systems are divisive, you're part of the problem. I don't care what side of the aisle you're on. I don't care what side of the vaccine story you're on. I don't care what side of the global warming story you're on. If you feel like you're on a side, you're part of the edifice. You're a brick. You're literally a brick in the edifice that, at least I feel like I've been sent here to take down. Like, I need to take down the rigid belief that we know from our own perspective. If you have a perspective that you would call your own, it's wrong. It's myopic. It's incomplete at very best. Be curious. Be overwhelmingly curious today. Why does somebody think that the globe is warming and you disagree? Why do they think that? Be curious. Like, that's a pretty smart human over there that had all the same neurons that you had coming into this world, different environment that they were steeped in, and they have a different worldview. Be really freaking curious about that, because they could inform and expand your reality. Realize, oh, like, I don't need to be against global warming. I need to be for the lungs of the planet. That's good. Like, we could all get behind that.
Right.
The planet should be allowed to breathe so that our children can breathe. Planet can't breathe, our children can't breathe. Now, that's a good correlation to make. And we can all agree on that, and we can all desire that for our grandchildren, that they could breathe this earth. And that if some enterprise, comes hovering over Earth and beams Scotty down and whatever in 50 years, or Spock shows up, I want him to say, good news, Captain. This planet can support life. Biology has been speaking for 4 billion years on this planet, and it's speaking in a beauty that we cannot really even imagine. And it's speaking us into an opportunity to participate. I find that amazing. So when you ask, is it too late for the farmland? Is it too late for the farmer? The answer is absolutely, unequivocally, no. It's not too late. There is time. Mother Nature's literally got 1 billion hands reaching out to shake our hands again and say, welcome back, humanity. Welcome back. We are so glad you're here. We've worked for billions of years so that you could be here, because we could see you as an incredible co-creator, a worker within nature to create more biodiversity, not to fear it, but to foster it, not to shut down the viruses, but to work with them for a brighter future, for a higher vibration of humanity. And so as we start to imagine the farmland and its potential, we get to see the same thing in my clinic in a day with a patient with cancer or autoimmune disease or autism, or walking out into the farmland in Hawaii here, or in the Midwest where we've done a lot of work, or in California farmland where we're doing a lot of work. In these spaces, when you walk out with that farmer, or you walk into the exam room with a patient who's changed their mindset, or a farmer who's changed his or her mindset, and she is now saying, I can work with nature to create vital soil again, and I won't need to spend millions of dollars on my farm with chemical inputs and then herbicides, pesticides to deal with the vulnerable immune system of those plants. I don't need to spend tens of thousands of dollars a month on my pharmaceuticals to keep me alive if I reintegrate into nature and I learn biologic vitality within me. And when they make that conscious, conscientious adaptation, transformation event of I am with nature, I am because of nature, not against her, the rate of healing cannot really be communicated. It's in the quantum realm. The speed that tissue repairs itself is stunning because of its complexity, right? And so the complexity of, I cut my skin and you can't even see the scar there. It took 5 years for that scar to go away, but I had this huge scar running up here. Slipped on a construction site, big nail went through my wrist, tore it, looked terrible. Today, you have to use your imagination to think that there was any scar there. The intelligence of the design of my wrist that knew how to go back to its former status before trauma, and it took years to do it, how to remodel back to some original design. The pace at which that's happening down at the quantum level is stunning. The finished effect maybe took 5 years, but at the biologic level, it remembered itself immediately. And the wrist started to go back to its original form in the split seconds after the nail tore through it. That's fascinating to me, that there is a quantum intelligence, a memory of where we come from and who we are that can supersede the trauma. Whether we're a farm field or a human, we heal at a quantum level, not at a biologic level. The quantum field is informing the biology to its original form, to its original intelligence, to its original capacity for adaptation and transformation. And so I am very excited to say that when a farmer makes that incredible transition of saying, all I'm going to do this year is not till. I'm just going to let the mycelium and the soil recover this fall and winter. I'm not going to till at the end of the season. And I'm going to have the messiest farm in many miles across Kansas. You drive for miles in December across Kansas and it's plowed up fields, brown dirt for as far as the eye can see. And then suddenly there's a field that's all covered with all this biomass and it looks weedy and it looks like junk and you're like, oh, that farmer must have died or something. That farmer was the one that made that psychological shift to say, I wonder what would happen if I didn't kill the soil before winter. And it lets the mycelium recover, and by spring, the vitality that leaps out of that earth, that farmer doesn't remember because it was his great-great-grandfather that last had that soil at that level of vitality in one season. 3 seasons later, you are now dealing with a regenerative space if done without herbicides, pesticides, and you start to foster biodiversity through cover crops. And you seed 15 species of cover crops before you ever put your food crop in. And instead of plowing that up or spraying it with herbicide to kill the cover crop, you actually plow that in like the hooves of an animal with a roller crimper or high intensity grazing process with animals, and you get all that biologic life and diversity back in there. Now you have life returning to that farm that may not have been there for thousands of years, because Western civilization, even before the march of the West, civilization was depleting Mother Earth, was depleting soil systems through our lack of understanding of its diversity and need for diversity. And so we could be part of this earth returning to that Garden of Eden that is told in our myths and our scriptures and everything else. That Garden of Eden is just a century away, 2 centuries away, if we change our behavior. The great-grandchildren of this species could be breathing cleaner air and have more carbon vitality within their bodies than humanity has ever seen, because the last extinction event 55 million years ago was the death of the topsoil. An asteroid hit, covered the topsoil in a layer of dust, and the planet choked. It was suffocated in a split second. Now we're suffocating it through the chronic emphysematous process of agriculture. And in its emphysema, in its lack of breath, our vitality is failing. But if we reverse that and allow that planet to breathe again and then foster the soils back to where it was pre-dinosaur phase, when we were 60, 80 million years back, we could do that. This Earth we now know is capable of creating carbon cycles so fast, and with the fostering of biodiversity through human behavior, we could accelerate that process rather than kill the process. We could accelerate the recovery of the planet, not just from our behavior, but from previous extinction events.
You must spend time in the environmental community, you know, ecology, farming. Are they listening?
That's a tough one to answer for me. People are listening. Some people are definitely listening. But in history, I'm not sure if we've had a moment of more division within our species than we have today. And we've talked about some of the mechanisms: social media, politics, activism as a divisive tool. Are we listening? We're certainly listening. I guess the question of what are we listening to? And are people listening to me or you? Some are, not very many. There's 7.5 billion people on the 7.8 billion.
Yeah.
We're scratching the surface. So whatever your audience is, way bigger than mine, but I feel like I talk to a small family of humans every day.
Yeah.
And I interact with this small family, and I just try to express my enthusiasm for life, my excitement for being alive right now at the tipping point of all things. We're alive right now. What are we listening to? And you know, a colleague of mine and I are working on this story of beauty as maybe our template, maybe our way out is a religious zeal for beauty. If we as a species stop worshiping our technology and look for beauty instead, we will not look at our phones. They're inherently not beautiful. We will look out at the sunset. And what I find very curious about the human brain and our entire sensory neural system is we were tuned to recognize beauty with no teaching. Every race or creed, any age of person, you show them the oranges and pinks of a sunset and ask them if it's beautiful, and they don't need a description of beauty. They don't need a definition. They will tell you it's beautiful. Nature is inherently the beauty that guides us forward. So in your own life, if you're listening to all of this, you're like, oh my God, we're wrong about everything. Yeah, we actually are wrong about everything. As a species, we were doing the wrong thing because we believed ourselves separate from nature, because we wrote ourselves out of the definition. And so if you are seeking a new North Star, I offer you beauty as a way back. The beauty of Mother Nature can lead you back into her womb and rebirth something much different in your life. I am trying to rebirth it again today. I'm not the beauty that I know I could be. I'm infantile in my ability to speak and communicate truth. I'm infantile in my ability to listen and truly hear somebody, walk in their moccasins for a moment of their story. I love this term that's used in Hawaii here, which is let's talk story. Instead of like, let's go hang out, let's talk story. That is a brilliant phrase, because if it's not for the stories that have shaped our understanding as humans, we would have no consciousness. We would have no understanding of where we sit within the framework of humanity and life on the planet. And so I appreciate the opportunity to talk story with you today. I'm telling you nothing more than just what's come to my mind and what I've observed. It's no deeper truth than anybody else holds. The things I talk about today are begging for more input. My truth is desiring more community interaction and connectivity. I want to be enriched by the perspectives that disagree with me today, that say, oh no, humans have nothing to do with global warming. I'm super interested to see your data. I'm super interested to see the science that shapes your worldview on that. Because I hope you're right, because I hope we're not nearly as destructive and injurious as we are. Yeah. We look pretty horrific. Our track record seems to suck in this area of kindness to Mother Earth, of stewardship. We don't have a good track record. I hope somebody's right out there that maybe there's a recovery faster and easier than I'm seeing. But I'm interested, and if we lose the interest, if we lose the curiosity, then our hope is probably gone for our species, which is okay. We can fade into the sunset of humanity, and as long as we're trying to love each other into the mists of the memory of humans on Earth, we will do ourselves good anyways. And extinction is not a bad thing if we go in alert. If we understand how and why we triggered our own extinction events, we can maybe carry that into the energies of the universe to inform others. We put intelligence into the universe through our own experience. So if we're alert, we can still contribute in our death. But if we stay drugged through our pharmacy or through our social media, and we stay numb to the human condition as we march to our extinction, then we do nothing for the intelligence of nature. We contribute nothing to, we only extract. So we need to wake up, we need to put the drugs down, and we need to walk into a future we all want.
Amen. When you say that beauty, we've got to work out this relationship with each other. We're going to regret it. What you've represented to me is what is a better definition of God than most religions really, I think, are able to encapsulate. It's all of us. And I totally agree with you. I too am working with friends and family that aren't agreeing with where I'm at. I know that as soon as I make them angry and they're walking away, I haven't achieved what I should have achieved. I'm doing something wrong. I've got to get better at that. And maybe I'm not seeing enough beauty, or maybe I'm not helping them see their beauty.
I think you're right on it there. I think that's the application now. The responsibility is at the individual level. We all need to step up now.
Yeah.
There's no 5 people that are going to change this thing. There's no 50 people. There's 7.8 billion people that showed up right now. And we all have to be part of that moment in time where we simply change our identity. We need to be back in nature. We need to reintegrate. And we need to seek the beauty. And we need to seek it in relationship. And the reason why, if we really want to drill down hard on relationship, it doesn't work. Humans are terrible at it. 50% divorce rate, you can, all kinds of statistics you point to. But I would just point to every single marriage that stays or doesn't stay or whatever. Are you finding the joy and beauty with your partner today? And I would say, unfortunately, a lot of days you can't. You're frustrated at each other. You're not connecting with each other. Feels like a to-do list. You're running through maintenance, not creativity. You feel like you're in fight or flight, not creativity. All of these things. The responsibility within that is to find the beauty within ourselves. It's the hardest thing that I do. I can see beauty under the microscope all day long. I can certainly go to the planetarium and blow my mind over the beauty of the universe through the Hubble telescope, or I can go and sail in the dark ocean of the Pacific and blow my mind over the Milky Way from the deck of a boat. I can blow my mind over that beauty, but then when I look at myself, I struggle to find the beauty because I have so many pre-programmed deconstruction events that occur in my mind when I try to find my own beauty. And so I really believe that when we see dysfunctional relationships, families, communities, it's because we're failing to see the beauty within ourselves. And so if I could offer each of you listening like that avenue out of the trap, I would say realize that you are not human. If you're looking for the beauty and can't find it, it's because you keep looking in your human mind for the beauty. You are actually a 70 trillion celled organism that we call human that's supported by 1.5 quadrillion bacteria, supported by 14 quadrillion mitochondria. You are a biophotonic releasing agent. You are an energy mechanism for expressing light on the planet. That is your biology. You are a light force not because of your humanity, but because of your microbiome. The humanness of you is simply the filter through which all the light shines. And Del, I see a lot of humanity in you. I see the struggle in your own journey that I have seen in my own journey. Mm-hmm. We struggle through our journeys because we don't know who we are half the time. We are literally looking for our own self-identity. And we are looking at each other to be the mirror so that we can better see each other. And it's in community that we start to find the healing and the lack of belief of beauty within. It's in community that we start to be able to show each other just how beautiful we are as an individual and as a superorganism that we would call humanity. If you can't trust the human within you to find the beauty, start to imagine 1.5 quadrillion bacteria of over 40,000 species that are working in concert right now to nursemaid your health such that you woke up this morning on the pillow, your eyes opened, and you had a conscious thought. Thank your microbiome. Thank that organic garden within you because it created you today. You are the thing growing in the organic garden today. If you can't come and wrap your head around GMO crops with me, I want you just to think about yourself. You might be a genetically modified organism if you've taken the vaccine, but let's love the crop no matter what it bears. Yeah. All right, and so whether we be GMO'd or not, let's recognize the beauty of life growing out of soil. And life is growing today at a rate of human existence that's never been seen on the planet before. 7.8 billion souls, too big to imagine. It's too big of a number. So what can we create when we connect together? When we keep our curiosity, our love for each other, and our interests, and our kind of striving for beauty in those relationships, and see what we create.
I'm down. Let's do it.
Good to be with you, Dylan.
You too, brother.
Appreciate you.